Have you ever trusted someone so much, only to watch them betray you in the most heartless way possible? Now imagine being 9 months pregnant, on the edge of bringing life into the world, and instead of support, you're dragged away in handcuffs because your husband accused you of stealing a measly $100. Welcome to Twilight Tales, where real-life inspired stories take you on unforgettable emotional journeys. If you're visiting for the first time, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And here's a question. Would you forgive someone who threw you behind bars at your most vulnerable moment? Today's story is one that will shake your soul. It's about a man who let his pride destroy his own family. A man who accused the woman he vowed to love and protect. And a woman who didn't just survive the betrayal, she rose above it. The woman in this story was no criminal. She was a loving wife, just days away from delivering their child. But when $100 went missing, instead of asking questions, her husband called the police. He didn't care that she was pregnant. He didn't care that she was crying. He only cared about control. What followed was a series of events no one expected. She gave birth alone in a jail cell. He later discovered the money hadn't even been stolen. And by then he had lost everything: his wife, his child, and his dignity. This isn't just a story about a broken marriage. It's about what happens when you allow ego, bitterness, and mistrust to rule your heart. And most importantly, it's about resilience, redemption, and consequences. Stay with us, because by the end of this tale, you'll be reminded of one truth. What you do in a moment of anger can change your life forever. Before the disaster unfolded, they were just like any other young couple, full of dreams, working hard to build a future together. Her name was Danielle. A warm-hearted woman with a gentle smile and quiet strength. She didn't have much growing up, but she believed in love, loyalty, and the power of family. She met Marcus at a church event in their mid-20s. He was charming, ambitious, and knew how to talk his way into anyone's good side. Danielle fell for him quickly, and when he asked her to marry him after just 6 months, she didn't hesitate. She believed he'd be the rock she could lean on. But as soon as the wedding celebrations faded, reality crept in. Marcus had big ideas but no discipline. He quit job after job, always chasing the next big thing. Meanwhile, Danielle worked double shifts at a diner, carrying the weight of their bills, and eventually their baby, all while trying to keep the peace at home. By the time she was 8 months pregnant, Marcus was bitter and restless. He blamed the world for his failures. Every little disagreement turned into an argument. And Danielle? She kept shrinking into herself, hoping that if she just stayed quiet long enough, things would get better. They rented a small apartment in a rougher part of town. The fridge was often half empty. Danielle stopped buying prenatal vitamins just so she could pay the electric bill. But even through all of it, she never stopped believing in Marcus. She told herself, he's just stressed. Once the baby arrives, he'll change. He'll step up. But Marcus wasn't planning to step up. In fact, he was spiraling down. He started accusing her of things that didn't make sense. Taking too long at the store, hiding things from him, even spending money behind his back. Danielle tried to reassure him to be patient, but the tension kept rising. And deep down, she started to fear something she didn't want to admit out loud. The man she married wasn't the man she was living with anymore. Then, one morning, just 10 days before her due date, something happened that would change everything. Marcus reached for the last $100 in his wallet, and it was gone. He didn't ask questions. He didn't look around the apartment. He didn't even stop to consider that maybe, just maybe, he misplaced it. He just looked at her. With cold, narrowed eyes. And what he said next would mark the beginning of the most painful chapter of Danielle's life. If you think you're going to rob me while sitting around pregnant, you've got another thing coming. Danielle froze. Her hand trembled over the sink as she tried to process what Marcus had just said. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Marcus stormed across the room, throwing open drawers and cabinets, cursing under his breath. "Don't play dumb. The money was in my wallet last night. Now it's gone. You're the only one here. Where is it?" Danielle blinked back tears. She hadn't touched his wallet. She hadn't even left the house that morning. Her swollen ankles made it hard to walk more than a few steps without resting. "Marcus, I didn't take anything. Maybe it slipped out somewhere. Maybe check your jeans?" "I already did," he roared, slamming a drawer shut so hard the handle cracked. "You think I'm stupid? You think just because you're pregnant you can do whatever you want and get away with it?" She stared at him, shocked by his tone, by how fast everything was unraveling. The baby kicked hard. It was like even the child inside her sensed the danger. "Please," Danielle begged, holding her stomach, "don't do this. Let's just sit down and look together." "We can." But Marcus wasn't listening. He'd already picked up his phone. And before she could stop him, he was speaking to a 911 dispatcher. "Yeah, I need someone sent out. My wife stole from me. Yes, she's still here. Yes, I want to press charges." Danielle felt the air leave her lungs. Within 20 minutes, 2 police officers showed up at their door. Danielle stood in a faded maternity dress, her belly round and prominent, trying to explain that she didn't steal anything, that she didn't even know what was going on. One of the officers hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Sir, your wife is visibly pregnant. Are you sure you want to go through with this?" Marcus folded his arms. "I said what I said. You don't know her like I do. She's playing you." Danielle pleaded, but it didn't matter. Her hands were cuffed. And as she was led out of the apartment, down the stairs, and into the back of the police car, all she could do was turn her head and ask the man she loved, "Why are you doing this to me?" He didn't answer. He just turned and walked back inside. The ride to the station was silent except for her quiet sobbing. And as the cell door slammed shut behind her, she realized something that made her heart break more than the cuffs ever could. The man she trusted to protect her had just thrown her to the wolves. The jail cell was cold. The air smelled like bleach and despair. Danielle sat on a thin metal bench, arms wrapped around her belly, trying to breathe through the panic. She wasn't a criminal. She hadn't hurt anyone. And yet here she was, 9 months pregnant, locked up like she didn't matter. The guards had barely spoken to her. No one offered her a blanket. No one cared that she was crying. No one cared that she hadn't eaten since morning. As the hours passed, a dull ache began in her lower back. Then the cramps came. At first, Danielle told herself it was just stress. False labor, maybe. But when the pain wrapped around her body like a tightening belt and her water broke onto the floor, she knew. The baby was coming. She pounded on the door with her fists, screaming for help. Her voice echoed off the walls, but no one came at first. When a guard finally rushed over, his face turned pale. "We need a nurse down here. Now." Danielle was taken to the infirmary, a room not meant for childbirth. There were no warm lights, no husband to hold her hand, no soothing words. Just fluorescent bulbs, white walls, and pain. She pushed through the contractions with tears in her eyes and fire in her veins. Not just from the labor but from the betrayal. Every scream was fueled by heartbreak. A young nurse held her hand, whispering gently, "You're strong. You can do this." And she did. After 5 grueling hours, Danielle gave birth to a beautiful baby boy. 7 pounds. Full head of hair. Eyes that blinked open and seemed to see everything. She held him close to her chest, sobbing softly, not because of the pain but because she knew. This baby deserved more than the life they were being handed. She didn't name him Marcus. She refused to even say that name out loud anymore. As she cradled her son, still wrapped in the thin, scratchy blanket the nurse provided, Danielle made a vow. "I'll protect you. I'll raise you right. Even if I have to do it all by myself." The next morning, after a public defender intervened and a nurse gave a full report of the delivery, the jail finally released her. The police couldn't find any proof of theft, just Marcus's word and nothing else. But Danielle didn't go home. She didn't even tell him where she was going. With her newborn in her arms, she left the station and walked toward the nearest women's shelter. Broken, exhausted, but unshakably determined. In that moment, Danielle wasn't just a new mother. She was a survivor, and she had just taken her first step toward freedom. 3 days after Danielle gave birth alone and left without a word, Marcus sat in their apartment. Alone, frustrated, and fuming. He thought she'd come crawling back. He expected tears, apologies, and maybe even her begging to be let back in. But there was nothing. Not a call. Not a message. Just silence. Then, while digging through the drawer beside his bed, looking for a USB drive, Marcus found something wedged deep in the back corner. Folded. The missing $100 bill. He froze. His stomach dropped as he pulled it out and stared at it. It had been there the whole time. No theft. No betrayal. Just a careless mistake that had cost him everything. He sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the money like it could somehow undo what he'd done. But the truth couldn't be ignored anymore. He had sent his heavily pregnant wife to jail over a false accusation, because he was too proud to ask questions, too arrogant to trust her, and too blind to see her pain. In that moment, guilt didn't just tap him on the shoulder. It crushed him. He rushed to the police station, asking where Danielle had gone after being released. But they wouldn't tell him. They had noted her fragile condition and added a confidential protection status to her release record. She'd asked not to be found. Marcus tried her family, No one answered. Tried mutual friends? They told him she'd said she didn't want anything to do with him again. Soon, everyone in the neighborhood knew what he'd done. Word spread quickly. Even his own mother, who had always taken his side, told him she was ashamed of him. At work he was pulled aside. The manager explained they couldn't have someone like him representing the company. He was let go, not for stealing but for something worse in their eyes: cruelty. Suddenly the walls of Marcus's life began to collapse. And the most painful part? He realized something too late. He hadn't just lost his wife. He'd lost the right to ever call himself her protector again. Danielle sat in a quiet room at the women's shelter, her baby asleep in a donated crib beside her. The walls were bare. The mattress was thin. But for the first time in weeks, she felt safe. She didn't cry anymore. She didn't replay his words in her head. She had no space for anger, only for plans. The shelter's counselor, Miss Lorna, was a kind older woman who immediately saw the strength in Danielle. She sat with her over tea and said, "You're not broken. You're bruised. But you still stand. That's power." Within a week, Danielle joined a support group for women who had escaped emotional and physical abuse. At first, she sat in silence, listening to the other women share their stories. But one evening, with her baby asleep in a sling across her chest, she stood up and told her story too. The room went still. And then, people clapped. That moment changed everything. Danielle realized her voice had value. Her pain had purpose. And she wasn't just going to survive, she was going to thrive. She found part-time work at a local diner, cleaning tables in the afternoons and helping with prep work at night. It was exhausting, especially with a newborn, but Danielle never complained. One day, while taking out the trash behind the diner, she bumped into a woman in business attire who had just finished her lunch. The woman dropped her briefcase, papers flying everywhere. Danielle helped gather them, smiling politely. "Thank you," the woman said, glancing at her name tag. "Danielle, you're not just a server, are you?" It turned out the woman was an executive from a nonprofit that offered scholarships to single mothers. They were looking for candidates with grit, character, and drive. Danielle was all three. She applied the next week, wrote her essay while rocking her baby to sleep, and 2 months later she got the acceptance letter. Full tuition, childcare support, a chance to rewrite her life. Over the next few years, Danielle studied social work by day, worked part-time at night, and built a life filled with quiet victories. She got her first apartment. Her son took his first steps across a worn but clean carpet. She learned to smile again, not because life was easy but because she was free. By the time her son turned 5, Danielle had graduated at the top of her class. She opened her own small counseling center for women recovering from domestic abuse. She became the very person she once needed. Danielle no longer looked back, because she had learned a truth far more valuable than any dollar. You can't choose who breaks you, but you can choose who you become after. Marcus's life didn't unravel overnight, but piece by piece it came apart. After losing his job, he bounced from one dead-end gig to another. No one wanted to hire a man with a reputation for having his pregnant wife arrested. Even the ones who didn't know the full story could sense something off in his eyes: bitterness, anger, guilt, a mix that never sat right. He couldn't sleep, couldn't think. He'd walk past the empty nursery he once painted, the crib still unassembled in the corner, and feel a hollowness he didn't have the courage to fill. For months he tried to find Danielle. He called hospitals, shelters, even churches. No one would give him anything. And those who did know her made one thing clear: she didn't want to be found. At first he told himself she was being petty. Then, when her silence never broke, not on his birthday, not during the holidays, not even on the date that should have been their anniversary, he realized something deeper. She wasn't being petty. She was done. One day Marcus tried showing up at her mother's house. He brought flowers and a baby toy. Danielle's younger brother answered the door. He took one look at Marcus and said coldly, "You really think she'd let you near that child? You put her in jail, man. She gave birth in chains. That's not something you fix with flowers." The door closed, and Marcus stood on the porch for a long time, gripping the stuffed bear until his knuckles went white. The loneliness set in. He stopped going out, stopped returning calls. He barely ate. He drank more. And his apartment, once a place he bragged about, became a mess of empty bottles and silence. The baby he had once claimed wasn't his problem? He now dreamt of holding him, hearing his laugh, teaching him how to ride a bike. But in those dreams the child always turned away. Because somewhere deep inside Marcus knew the truth. He didn't just betray his wife. He betrayed his son before ever meeting him. Years passed. and the world moved on without him. Danielle had risen. The child was growing. And Marcus? He had become a ghost in his own life, watching from the outside as the one thing that could have made him a better man, slipped away forever. He would have given anything to go back. But some mistakes don't come with a second chance, especially when you never earned the first one to begin with. It was a bright spring afternoon when their paths crossed again. Danielle was attending a community fundraiser hosted by a local nonprofit, one she now partnered with through her Women's Support Center. She stood on stage, delivering a short speech about strength, motherhood, and starting over. In the crowd, people nodded, clapped, some even wiped tears from their eyes. And somewhere in the back, silently and almost unrecognizably, stood Marcus. He looked older. Like life had chewed through him and spit him out in fragments. His clothes were wrinkled. His posture slouched. But his eyes locked on Danielle like he was seeing sunlight for the first time in years. When the event ended, Danielle stepped off the stage. She smiled and greeted attendees, shaking hands, taking photos, accepting quiet thank yous from women who saw her as a symbol of survival. Then she saw him, standing awkwardly by the refreshment table, clutching a paper cup of lemonade, waiting. He didn't say a word until she walked past him with her son, now 6, tall for his age, with intelligent eyes and a calm energy that mirrored hers. Marcus stepped forward. "Danielle?" His voice cracked. "Please. I just wanted to say I'm sorry." She turned slowly. Her son looked up, confused. Marcus dropped his gaze and continued. "I was wrong. About everything. I've lived every day knowing what I did to you. And to him. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I just needed to tell you. I was a coward. And I regret it all." Danielle studied him for a moment. Then she softly said, "You're right. You don't deserve my forgiveness." Marcus's eyes welled up. But then she added, "And yet, I forgave you a long time ago. Not for you. For me. So I could be free." She knelt beside her son, adjusted his collar, then stood tall. "But I won't forget what you taught me. I won't ever forget how strong I had to become because of what you did." Without another word, she turned and walked away. Her son asked, "Who was that man, Mama?" She looked down at him, smiled faintly, and said, "No one we need to worry about. Some stories leave us speechless. Others leave us stronger." Danielle's story is more than just a tragedy, it's a testimony. A testimony that you can lose everything and still rise again. That you can be broken and still rebuild. That even when someone betrays you in your most vulnerable moment, you get to decide how the story ends. Marcus let his pride and anger destroy his family. He thought control meant power. He thought punishment would make him feel bigger. But in the end, it only made him smaller, forgotten, alone, and filled with regret. Danielle? She turned her pain into power. She didn't let bitterness define her future. She rose with grace, built a life of purpose, and gave her son a future rooted in love, not revenge. And that's the lesson here. Sometimes the best form of justice is becoming everything they said you couldn't. So, to our viewers, let me ask you. If someone you loved turned against you like Marcus did, could you ever forgive them? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters, your story might just inspire someone else. If this story moved you even a little, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Twilight Tales for more powerful, emotional journeys based on true events and human resilience. We release new stories every week, stories that speak to the heart, challenge the mind, and sometimes heal a wound you forgot was there. Until next time, remember, it's not about what breaks you. It's about what you do after the fall.